It was a shocking crime that gripped the nation. On November 13th, 2022, just hours after a typical game day at the University of Idaho, 4 college students, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, were found brutally killed in an off-campus house. In July of 2025, Bryan Kohberger, a former PhD student studying criminology at the neighboring Washington State University, pleaded guilty to all 4 of their murders. For the past 3 years, Kohberger's family has largely stayed silent in the aftermath of the tragedy, until now. Less than 6 months after Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, one of his older sisters, Mel Kohberger, sat down with the New York Times, not to talk about the crimes, but to share part of her family's story. Howard Blum, a journalist and author of When the Night Comes Falling, a Requiem for the Idaho Student Murders, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss the interview. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me once again is Howard Blum, investigative journalist and author of When the Night Comes Falling. Howard, thank you so much for joining me.
Nice to speak with you again.
For the past 3 years, since Bryan Kohberger's arrest in December of 2022, his family has largely stayed silent and out of the public eye. But that all changed earlier this month when his older sister, Mel Kohberger, sat down with the New York Times for an interview to discuss what she described as her family's pain and confusion. So to start off the conversation, what did you think of the piece?
Well, first, I thought it was a good get, as we say in the news business, for the New York Times reporter. I wish I had gotten that interview. At the same time, she did not really reveal too much. And, my heart goes out for her. This is a story about victims. The victims, of course, the 4 students who were killed, their families, and also Kohberger's family. And I thought the Times interpretation of what she told them was a little off the mark in certain instances. What do I mean? She says at one point that her brother is not a violent person because once when they were having a dispute and it got fiery, I'm paraphrasing the words, he held back her arms. Well, I don't think I've ever held back my sister's arms in any dispute we might have had. I think she's trying to put a good gloss on things. I don't blame her. I think she's trying to come to terms with what happened and what she did or didn't do in her way. And, her whole life is going to be victimized by this.
I think that it's a really interesting piece, right? Or a really interesting discussion. The sibling of someone who pled guilty to these really, really heinous crimes. What do you make of a family member that's in that space speaking out? Because some have criticized this as being a puff piece, her kind of going on about this idyllic childhood that we'll get into. Other people have said, they really feel for her because she talks about this trauma. Clearly she's in pain. She talks about what her family's going through, but she always says the caveat, but it's not as bad as what the families of the victims are going through. Her pain and her family's pain pales in comparison to that. What do you make of that space that we're in?
Well, I think, she's trying to tread very agilely to a very tight rope. She does not want to tell everything she knows, and at the same time she wants to be forthcoming. And I also think, and I say this in defense of her, just like the witnesses to Kohberger that night, she's not even sure anymore what she knows or what she doesn't know. I mean, it's incomprehensible to believe that Kohberger lives 10 minutes from the murder site. He drives a white Hyundai. She sees him cleaning his car, that she doesn't put 2 and 2 together. And, she admits that after the murders occurred, she called up her brother and said, "I hope you're being safe." Well, I think she must have had other thoughts to whether or not she wanted to confront them. I was told by people in law enforcement that she had other thoughts. She couldn't quite process them. I'm not criticizing her. I'm not blaming her. This is a very tough mountain to climb. But at the same time, I don't think she's being totally forthcoming with the reporter and also with herself.
When I initially read this New York Times article, I thought of you and your reporting and your book, because I read your book twice, because you and I have talked about it multiple times in the past year and a half. Because how you describe Christmas 2022 in the Kohberger house is a lot different than how Mel Kohberger described it in this article. She says, according to the New York Times, "If I ever had a reason to believe my brother did anything, I would have turned him in." And that really doesn't seem to be congruous with your reporting. She describes Christmas break 2022 very differently. She noted her mom made vegan cookies to adhere to Bryan's diet. They played games as a family. And when she sliced her finger open accidentally, Bryan was really grossed out by the blood. He was freaked out by it, but then he helped her ultimately bandage it up. But you describe Mel coming home from the holidays or to celebrate the holidays very differently. She noticed some peculiar things according to your book. Bryan wearing surgical gloves while vacuuming his Hyundai Elantra, him sorting the family's trash, putting his trash in Ziploc baggies, and then her witnessing something that she ultimately wished she hadn't seen. According to your book, she caught him in the middle of the night slinking down their driveway and putting the family's trash in the neighbor's bin. So what do you make of these two Christmas breaks, the one she described versus the one that was in your book?
Well, first of all, I never spoke with her, but I did speak to people in law enforcement who were aware of what was happening and who also were involved in the surveillance of the house and aware of what the surveillance uncovered. I think it's a real stretch to believe, let's start with the father, that first of all, he goes out to be with his son. He makes his trip across country. Money is tight in the family, but he still flies out to travel with his son. Why does he do this? Well, maybe he just wants to be a good father, but I believe and it was told to me by people close to the case, that on a certain level, he had his suspicions. When, for example, they're going across country and they see the flashing lights in the rearview mirror of being pulled to the stop, I was told that the father's heart stopped. How could he not? The police all over the country are looking for a white Hyundai Elantra. He knows his son has problems. He knows his son has an emotional disaster waiting to happen. That's why he drove him out in the first place in the summer to school. And he has to have suspicions about his son. I believe, too, the sister, on some level, maybe she can't confront it now, but while it was happening, she does not want to blame herself for not going to the authorities, perhaps. I believe her heart is in the right place. I don't think her mind is attuned to what really happened. I got a B- in psychology, so I'm certainly no authority, but I did study cognitive dissonance, where a moment becomes too large for you to process. And I think that what was going on in her mind, just the way it was going on with Dylan Mortensen when they saw the intruder dressed in black in the house. No one knew really how to respond. None of us know how we will respond to a moment like that. And now in the aftermath, we try to put the pieces together, but they're not really accurate as to how we processed it at the time when they occurred.
When you're reading this article, what do you think of what was said versus what wasn't said? She didn't talk about the crimes, but she said she wanted to share part of her family's story. She described her brother as socially awkward, as abrasive, but as you said, they never saw any inkling of where he could be violent. As you said, her interpretation of him de-escalating an argument was, it seemed like it could have gotten physical on her end, and he held her hands down. She couldn't square the grisly nature of the crimes with who she knew as her brother, but also she didn't outright say anywhere in this piece, my brother is innocent. I mean, what do you make of how she's remembering her brother versus how she's talking about the victims' families and grappling with everything her family's been through?
I mean, she has a lot to process. And again, my heart goes out to her. I'm not condemning her, but I think, she's a family therapist. I think she needs a good deal of therapy to process the event that she went through. When she can talk about her brother holding back her arms, what provoked this argument? That's not pursued. What were they discussing? How forceful was he holding her back? Was she shocked by this? Is this something he had done in the past? Was there this sort of fisticuffs between them over the years? I mean, if she's a family therapist, what could he have done that would have provoked her to this sort of anger where he had to restrain her? She's remembering it in a way that's, I think, very self-serving, but she has that right. I think the family was a lot more complicated. I mean, this was a young man when he was growing up, was a heroin addict. He was morbidly obese. He, tries out to work for a local police service, and don't even allow him to be an assistant there. His friends complain about him being a bully, and yet she sees no signs, yet the father rushes out to be with him. None of the pieces really add up. I think we're, in hindsight, I think she's trying to put a gloss on it, but it still raises lots of doubts. And in my reporting, in my book, I pursued different avenues, and I still stand by them.
In this piece, Mel Kohberger talked about this idyllic childhood that she had. Her mom instilled these Catholic values in her and her siblings. They read Little House on the Prairie. They camped out in the backyard, stargazing and eating takeout. But what the article doesn't mention are the issues that Bryan Kohberger faced as both a student and a teaching assistant at Washington State University. In your book, you note that some students thought Kohberger was a misogynist because of the way that he went after women in arguments, in debates, in the classroom. Also, some female students complained about creepy and concerning behavior, and they took that to people at the university. Do you think this piece should have talked about those issues and concerns at WSU?
I imagine the reporter tried to get into that. I think there were strict ground rules, parameters that were laid out. It raises the issue. If you're a reporter and you're trying to get the interview, you have to make a deal with the person you're trying to get. And he had to make, this Times reporter had to make his deal. He came out of it with a good story, but he couldn't get the story, I'm sure, because he's a good reporter, that he wanted to write. The whole WSU experience is interesting in the fact that, documents have come out. He was reported 13 times by various students there. They all saw this. His family, in the course of 2 months, saw this. His family saw nothing out of all these years where he was living at home. I don't believe it. One professor, in fact, wrote to the department head that really I'm wary about Kohberger because some point down the road, he's going to get a professor's job. He's a smart guy, and some student is going to be in jeopardy of being harassed by him. He never imagined anything like murder, but everyone else saw these signs. How could the family not have seen them?
And I think one of the biggest questions that continues to haunt everyone about this case is the motive here. Bryan Kohberger never had to say why he did it. He just pleaded guilty to all 4 of these murders without providing a motive. Does this piece shed any light, in your opinion, on a possible motive?
What this piece sheds light on to me is the reason why the prosecution agreed to let's make a settlement without a motive, just as the reporter had to make his concessions to get this story. So the prosecution have to make a deal. I don't think they should have made this deal, but they made this deal to say, let's get this case wrapped up. Let's save the family's anguish. Let's save the state some money. Let's just move on and put this into the past. So everyone is just like the reporter made the deal, so did the state make a deal, and both of them are flawed deals. People can decide and argue whether they should not have made those deals at all. I think, one of the great issues of this case, and I keep on speaking to people because I'm doing some more digging on other aspects, is the motive. The fact that a settlement was made without having any idea of why it happened just raises so many issues, and why this case will linger on for years.
One of the other big questions surrounding this is what the family knew and when they knew it, if they knew anything. And according to the article, Kaylee Goncalves' dad, Steve, said he feels for the Kohberger sisters, right? They didn't murder anyone, yet they have faced this torrent of public scrutiny since the murders, since their brother was arrested. But he still has questions on what the parents knew or what they even suspected. That's long been a question here. What the parents knew, when they knew it, if at all. Melissa Kohberger, she was mad, according to this piece, at online theories that suggested her parents or her entire family knew anything. What do you make of that? Does this article clear up anything to you regarding what the Kohbergers knew, if they knew anything at all?
This article clears up absolutely nothing about that. I mean, there still is the fact that at 6:30 in the morning, just about after Bryan Kohberger's pose for that infamous selfie that he takes in his own bathroom after the murders with his thumbs up. He calls his mom and he speaks for her for more than an hour and a half. I find it difficult to believe that after he committed 4 murders that he admits to, that she didn't notice anything in his voice, in his mood, in the way he was. Yes, he calls regularly to speak to his mother, but I think something was betrayed. I can't believe that the father sat next to him in a Hyundai Elantra, about less than a yard apart for length of just about the entire country for this trip, while the police are looking for a white Hyundai Elantra, and his son lives 10 miles away, and they knew enough to ask their son if he should be worried about the murders, but not if any part of his being involved. I don't think we're getting the whole story. I think it might be difficult for the parents to articulate what they were feeling at the time, but I think there's a lot that has not been told. Also, early on in my reporting, why did Kohberger finally decide to make this plea deal? Part of the reason was, as it was explained to me by people close to the case, is that he felt that his parents were now going to be called on the stand. His mother would have to answer what specifically was said during that telephone conversation at 6:30 a.m. that went on for over an hour after the murders. It wasn't like a Times reporter you could make a deal. On the stand, they would have to direct questions. Same thing, his father was going to have to talk about what went on in this car trip across America. Again, rather than put them on the stand, put them in any kind of jeopardy. That was one of the reasons why he made this deal. Of course, there were other reasons. He wanted to avoid the firing squad. Maybe he wanted the whole thing to disappear. But I think, again, we're not hearing the whole story. There was a closeness between his sister and Kohberger. She sent him a heart. This heart was in front of him when he pled guilty. Why did he felt a closeness to his family. He was pleading guilty to 4 murders, and yet he was also thinking about his family. I find it difficult to believe they hadn't shared enough for them to get a sense of what was going on in his world and his life. If professors were getting it, if students were getting the sense, why didn't his family were in close contact? Or maybe they were used to a level of behavior that was so outrageous normally that they didn't see any difference. But she does not say that there was any real outrageous behavior. She reports, makes it seem like the Von Trapp family from The Sound of Music. They were all cavorting in the backyard in Connecticut under the stars. This one happy family. I don't think that was the case. Again, the father went through bankruptcies twice. It was a tough life. The son was a heroin. A father calls the police on the son after he steals the daughter's iPhone. This was, not a happy childhood. And in retrospect, I think she's putting a gloss on it.
To that point, and based on all of your reporting on the Kohbergers and on this case, if you had the opportunity to sit down with Mel Kohberger, what would you ask her?
I would try to get into, and I'd love to have the opportunity to speak with her. I love the opportunity to speak with him, quite frankly. Bryan, what was the daily life like in that house? Were they fearful of him? Did they try to control him? Did they think he had turned his life around? What was his life like before he had turned his life around? Were they surprised he wound up at Washington State University for a PhD candidate when he had such a poor high school record? I mean, there was a lot of reasons for them to be proud of him, of Kohberger. He found this will to turn his life around. I'd like to find out how Kohberger found this will and what he really couldn't overcome in the end. What was his innate nature?
And I want to get your take on some recent news as well. The families of the 4 victims, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Washington State University, the school where Bryan Kohberger was both a student and teaching assistant. The suit alleges he was a WSU employee, quote, with a known history of threatening, stalking, and predatory behavior. What do you make of this suit?
Well, 2 things are significant about the suit, I think. First of all, this is the first time, at least that I can remember, that all 4 of the victims' parents went together to act in a coalition. During the course of this case, they've been at odds, or the Chapins have just stayed out of any discussions. Now they're all acting together. Why are they acting together? I don't think it's to collect money. I think they want to make a point for future generations that when you, as parents, when you send your kids off to school, the school has a real responsibility, local parentis. They have to watch your kids. I've sent my kids off to school. I've worried about them. Here, 13 times, according to the documents that have been released, people complained about Kohberger. That's part of his record at WSU, and nothing ultimately was done. And there's a thin line that you want to protect the rights of anyone, but also you want to make sure your students are safe. I think they're coming down that maybe we should be more concerned about the safety of our students than alleged rights that people have in the university process.
The lawsuit was 126 pages long, and this is what it says in part. Despite receiving at least 13 formal complaints of Kohberger's inappropriate, predatory, and menacing behavior, WSU failed to respond in any meaningful way and allowed Kohberger's escalating behavior to continue unchecked. How strong of a case do you think these families have against the school?
I think they have a very strong case, but I think they want to make this a national issue. I think this is their forum to say what is the university's responsibility to protect their students. I don't think their lawyers might be out to win this case, but I think what's motivating them, and again, I haven't spoken to any of the families about this is my instinct, is that they want to protect future students, future generations. When there are 13 times that you're getting reports about an individual, you better take pause and you better do something to protect the students he interacts with.
Howard Blum, I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much for the time. You're welcome back anytime.
It's great to speak with you.